Charles Ponzi Story. By way of applause, how many people here have been to a podcast premiere? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's a weird thing, but we're gonna see one today, and it's gonna be a great one. This show, so good. When I first heard it, the acting, the writing, I love it, and you'll all be able to say, you know, I went to the podcast premiere of Easy Money, and people will probably be like, what's a podcast premiere? But so happy you're here. I want to quickly thank Audible, our sponsor for the audio storytelling program at Tribeca. I want to thank Allison Morgan, Base Hohen, Will Malnati, Kyle Wasserman, just the whole team at Apple and Apple, and yeah, I also am very excited because tonight we've got, you know her from maybe The Sopranos, Jamie-Lynn Sigler. And also a comedian named Sebastian Maniscalco. So we're going to watch a quick Tribeca trailer, and then after that, please enjoy Easy Money, the Charles Ponzi Story. Thank you.
Welcome to an exclusive preview and chat with the producer and star of the forthcoming Apple TV original podcast series, Easy Money, the Charles Ponzi Story. We'll be hearing clips of the show and get to talk with the executive producer and star, Sebastian Maniscalco. I have a feeling that's why a lot of you are here. But before we bring him out to help us get things set up and learn how this incredible show came to be, please welcome executive producer and CEO of At Will Media, my old pal, Will Malnati, and the host, Maya Lau. All right, Will, let's start with you. Tell me and tell all of us about your production at Will Media, because I want to know how projects like this come together. Walk us through the process of finding a story, developing it, and then finding a distributor like Apple.
Well, it's a multi-tiered question.
Yes.
Let me start with this. I think, you know, with any story, you're looking for something that will pull you along for 8 episodes. I'm sure everyone has seen documentaries or TV series, and you're like, I feel like the show is over like around the 5th episode. And with this one, you know, especially with a true story like this, you're always on the search for something that has as many just different moving parts of this story, from this dynamic character in Charles Ponzi to, you know, there's antagonists built into this thing. I mean, like, you can't write it like this story really did happen. And so when we came across this story that I had never heard of, you know, obviously I'd heard of a Ponzi scheme before, but I never knew there was a guy named Charles Ponzi. When you started to really dig into this guy's life, and his love life, and his, you know, his home life, and the way he was brought up, it was like, wow, this is the makings of something really special. And so for me, as someone who's always looking for great stories, it was like, oh, we have something here. This is something we really need to double click on and look at seriously. And I'm so glad we did. That was, by the way, that was like 3.5 years ago. Of course, all these things take forever. But now we're here, you know, finally made it to the other side and can share with everyone here. By the way, thank you everyone for coming to this. This is awesome.
So the show has a really unique and specific format. I really enjoyed it, and I want to get more into it and explain how much I loved it and why, but can you explain to the audience first, like, what it is and how it works, the format?
Well, hold on one second, and you can answer this, but I just want to first say this. Jamie-Lynn is an amazing person. If you don't know her, You should get to know her. She came all the way from LA to come here and do this for us, and we just like love her for it. And she listened to the whole thing and really like ingested it, and so thank you. By the way, Jamie won't plug herself. She has not one but two incredible podcasts of her own. So anyone here who loves podcasts, check out Jamie-Lynn's 2 podcasts. She works very hard on them.
Thank you.
But anyway, in terms of this format, you want to take it, Maya?
Yeah, sure. This is a docudrama series. So because this is a true story, we have, this is a reported story, and I'm the host, kind of narrating, carrying the listener along through the story. But also because it happened 100 years ago in Boston, there's not audio that we can use of Charles Ponzi and the other characters. So we used actors to bring to life scenes that really happened. They're sort of based on a true story, based on what we know happened, and we intersperse that. So it's both a reported true story with dramatized scenes throughout. And I think it's really definitely unlike anything I've worked on. When I first heard about it, I was having a hard time envisioning how those transitions would go, but I think that the entire team did an amazing job of making it work.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody that didn't know anything about this story as well, which I don't think many people do know about Charles Ponzi, the way that you interweaved the dramatic reenactments, but also really set the stage and helped us understand the time in history that it was, what people felt at that time. You really bolstered us with all the information needed to then drop into these, fictional dramatic scenes that, fortunately, though, you had a lot of information and background that you don't get to have a lot of the time with projects like this, because Charles Ponzi wrote his own memoir in jail. Like, how often do you get that? Like, having this historical figure who, look, he ran a Ponzi scheme, so he could have been maybe slightly manipulating the narrative, but gave so much information for this.
Right, he wrote his own memoir because he loved himself and thought of himself very highly, even after going to prison and after having to be deported. And so we have that material. We also have books that have been written about him. There's news clippings, and that's one of the great things about newspapers, is that you can go and read actual news clippings from the 1920s, from even before then, and see how people were talking about him. And we pieced the story together from there. We also got access to love letters that Ponzi wrote to his wife, Rose, from when he was in prison and from when he was in exile. And I was able to go and meet with Rose's family that still is living just outside Boston and sit with them and page through these love letters and find that, Ponzi was still very much in love with his wife and also still pitching new schemes from after serving time in prison. He still thought he still had it, and that he just hadn't hit upon the right scheme yet to really be profitable.
He's a really interesting guy. Well, Maya, tell us a little bit about your background and then how you got involved with this project.
I'm an investigative reporter. I was an investigative reporter with the LA Times and with The Advocate in Louisiana, and I pivoted into the podcast world. I started my own podcast, Other People's Pockets, which is about personal finance, and I got involved. I was contacted by the team who wanted basically somebody like me with a bit of a financial bent, but a reporter, to really help dig through the records and figure out what are the additional reporting questions that we need to ask. They had an amazing handle on how to write a script and the dramatized elements, and I kind of brought in who are the modern day experts that we can talk to have more context to understand this story that happened so long ago.
And also to study and understand Ponzi schemes, which you have studied extensively. So can you kind of break down just what a Ponzi scheme is for us?
Sure, a Ponzi scheme, a lot of people have heard about a pyramid scheme at the same time as a Ponzi scheme. So basically it's a scam in which somebody is taking money from you and telling you that they're investing it in something which is going to generate an investment return for you. And in fact, they're not investing it in anything at all. They're stealing the money and then taking that money and paying it out to other customers who want their money back or who want their return already. And the difference between a pyramid scheme and a Ponzi scheme is that in a pyramid scheme, and many MLMs like multi-level marketing, like Avon, stuff like that, there's a product involved. So there's like makeup, or you get a thing out of it. And you recruit other people below you, and then the money flows to the top. In a Ponzi scheme, there's no product. It's just thin air that you don't get anything out of it. So, and there's typically just one person at the top. That was true with Charles Ponzi. Even his wife didn't know. People that he worked with, he had an office, he had employees. Nobody knew. He controlled it all.
And I just wanted to reference what's up here on the screen. So this was his version. This is what he came up with. And there's Ponzi schemes in lots of industries these days. Why I can tell you, but this is what he was doing, Charles Ponzi. He basically said, all right, there's such thing as an international reply coupon. Essentially, you buy this postage stamp for one price in one country. Well, if it's less in another country, you come sell it in the United States for more and make a profit on the difference of how much this postage stamp costs. And so he had figured it all out, or so he thought, that if he was to get enough postage stamps like this one, he could sell them at a profit elsewhere. He could sell them at a profit in Europe. And so he always told people, hey, I'm making a bunch of profit on this because I go and sell them in Europe. I have a guy that takes all my stamps and sails off to Europe. And whether he was actually doing that or not, people could never know, because he was smiling at them and seemed trustworthy and said he was.
And he was from Italy, and he was in Boston, so he had this credibility of being European. People felt like, oh, you have a guy in Europe, So he was always able to hide that, and whenever anyone asked, well, how does your business really work? Oh, that's a trade secret. I can't tell you, because if I told you, then everybody would copy me. So then you just never get to know how it really works, which is that it doesn't work.
Well, speaking of him being trustworthy, you speak multiple times over the podcast comparing him to probably one of the most famous Ponzi schemers of our lifetime, Bernie Madoff. And there's so many interesting characteristics that they have in common. One of them being the charisma to be able to have people trust them, the calm that they have within situations, and also the state of delusion that they allow themselves to be in, that one probably has to be in, to kind of believe that they're actually not doing anything wrong.
Yeah, I think that as we learned with Charles Ponzi, these guys really do believe in what they are doing, and that's why they're able to convey this, what seems like genuine salesmanship to other people, because they don't feel like they're telling a lie when they're pitching this to you. And yeah, there's a lot of self-delusion, there's probably a lot of clinical narcissism of like being so obsessed with yourself and your own ideas, but you're unable to think 10 steps down the road of how is this gonna work out? How am I ever gonna get out of this? Which they never can, because as one of the experts we talked to mentioned, even if you had as a customer every person on this earth, the house of cards would still fall, because eventually people want their money back, and you have to give that out with the money that is from other people.
Well, and like they said in the preview, they really don't have an end game, these guys. It's just about keeping it going, which is frightening. So it's probably becoming obvious why this scheme is named after Charles Ponzi. So why did you guys decide to tell this story from over a century ago?
Well, I think it's still very obvious these days that some of the similar kind of themes of this show are relevant, and we're talking about power, we're talking about deceit, we're talking about how you're trying to use the media to spin things and to write about you a certain way. Charles Ponzi did a lot of that. He was arm in arm with the press, until they started to turn on him, or at least one of these, the Boston Post was the big newspaper that started to turn on him. But you still see that all the time, every day, and from just like a business and financial perspective, we've been talking about this a bit. It's just like crypto and AI and all these new things that we have no idea what the actual future potential is of these things are now starting to really infiltrate into some of these schemes. And like, wow, that's like truly could pour gasoline on an already established issue, which is a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, and learning through this just how common Ponzi schemes are. And I learned the term affinity fraud, which I thought was really interesting. Do you mind explaining to everybody what that is?
Yeah, so affinity fraud is when fraud occurs within a social group, so a tight-knit group like a church, an alumni network, even your group of friends, anybody that you trust. Because the thing is, none of us, even people who work in finance, nobody really understands money. We're all mystified about how money actually works and how we can get ahead. And so we have to trust a guy. We have to know someone who says that they have an in, and who are you going to trust more but your cousin, your pastor, whoever it is, that you take that shortcut and say, okay, great, I'm going to trust you. You're coming to me with a business opportunity. And that's how these things start. And one of the experts we spoke to said, there's no way to absolutely end Ponzi schemes. They still go on. Part of what was interesting to us is they're still alive and well. And it's because people just trust one another and want to make money. And so if you don't want to be part of a Ponzi scheme, one of the recommendations is to never invest with friends or family. Just don't do it, because that's how.
Did you hear that? For everyone paying attention, just don't invest with friends or family. It's very simple.
If your friend has a restaurant that's opening, consider it a gift. Consider it not money that you're going to get back, because that is literally how they start. And so you see that a lot with churches. You see that a lot with, in an immigrant community, which is what Charles Ponzi profited off of. Is I'm an immigrant just like you. I want to help you. I got ahead. I'm figuring out how America works. And so that is, it makes you a sitting duck.
And with easy money, everybody wants it. And when you hear that, you don't want to ask questions. You don't want to know how you're getting it, right? It's like people would rather be ignorant to it, but when you have the trust factor in there is when it gets dangerous. So that makes a lot of sense. So to transition to how this story comes magically to life, it's time to bring out Easy Money's star. And again, I'm pretty sure the reason why you're all here. So please welcome to the stage, Sebastian Maniscalco.
Hello, thanks
Nice
for
to
being
see
here, everybody.
Nice to see you. I've had the pleasure of meeting Sebastian actually on one of my podcasts, Not Today, Pal. He was so generous to come to Austin and visit my friend Rob and I. You were awesome. I've been such a fan of you for so long, and you've made a career out of pointing out the absurdities of life. Some of my favorites recently are bowling shoes. I agree. I don't get it.
Yeah, I'm not into bowling shoes. Rather bring my own shoes and bowl. So.
I support that. So you've been a titan of comedy for so long. You've hosted podcasts, and as of late, you've really begun to make a name for yourself as an actor. You were in The Irishman, Bookies, that's right, working with Scorsese, De Niro. Was acting always, a goal of yours? Is there a reason that you've sort of been inside of things?
It wasn't a big goal of mine. I came out to Los Angeles in 1998 to do stand-up comedy, and just on the back of stand-up, I started getting roles, or started getting an interest in doing roles as an actor. So yeah, it's not like a burning passion of mine. I'd rather do stand-up comedy, but I like doing acting. I like doing projects that I feel passionate about. That's why I did this one, because as soon as I read that Ponzi set up shop right next to City Hall, I mean, that's like a drug dealer setting up right next to the police station. That kind of drew me in. I go, this sounds like a really interesting story to tell. And the way we did it through a podcast is very unfamiliar to me. And I thought it was an exciting new venture, and I like challenges. So it's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Definitely, it was difficult for me.
Well, you did a phenomenal job, because I have to say, from moment one, from second one, when the podcast starts and you hear your voice, you're immediately drawn into the story, immediately connected to Ponzi. And as I'm listening to it, all I could feel was like, I want to finish these 8 episodes and go to the movie theater or turn on my television and watch you in this film. So I really hope that this leads to that, because there's no one on this planet meant to play Charles Ponzi more than you.
How crazy is
I
that?
mean, it's uncanny. I don't know what Rose looks like, but I'll throw my name in there for the ring for that. I'm kidding. I'm
Yeah,
not kidding.
he's 5'2", by the way. He's a small man, but yeah, they do look alike.
So I just want to start with you telling us, how did you get involved with this project?
Well, I met Will. He came to one of my shows, and we started talking backstage. He had this project, and he told me all about it, and I was interested in doing it, and
We were looking for more things to do at the time.
yeah, like just pile it on.
This guy's touring like 340 days a year, and he still made time to do this, which is like incredible.
No, well, listen, thank you. It was very sweet. It was something that I again felt passionate about, and really wanted to challenge myself. So we started recording. I think and Jamie was asking how long did this take to do, and this was something. If you're unfamiliar with the process of this, which I was, you're in a recording booth with nobody. Normally, I could barely act with the people next to me in a movie, let alone people behind glass. So I'm like, how is this gonna work? You know, you're gonna bring in the other actors, they're gonna do their bit, and they're gonna marry it together. But when you listen to it, it sounds like we're all in the room together, the sound effects, the investigative journalism. To be honest with you, when I was listening to it, I wanted to get to the investigative journalism part more than I didn't really like listening to me. I'm like, let's get to like this part of it. So that's what I found interesting about it. And another thing I found fascinating, and I don't know if we have any married couples in the audience. Yeah? Okay.
We're used to crowd work now.
My wife is here, she'll vouch for this. Rose, my Ponzi's wife, is in the dark. Doesn't have any idea this is even going on, right? And she suspects it a little bit, but like, my wife, like, I like to have Chipotle burritos, and they're not really good for you. So I'll come home, I'll sneak one out, and I'll come home, and my wife's like, do you have a burrito? I can't see anything by my wife. And this guy is stealing $250 million from people, and the wife's walking around, oh, this is great. Fascinating. Just that alone is a lesson.
Did you know of Charles Ponzi before? Did you know anything about this story prior to the project?
No idea that the Ponzi scheme was named after a guy. It's one of those things where you just hear Ponzi and like, oh, that person might have made that up somewhere. So I didn't know that the Ponzi was a real life guy, and I was almost subject to a Ponzi scheme, not almost, I saw it kind of happening in front of me where I used to work. And it was very alluring. The amount of money that was being thrown around, you're like, wow, what are these people doing? But again, I'm Italian, and I'm very suspicious of people, all right? So my grandfather didn't want to put money in like the stocks because he thought that was a scam. So I grew up in a family where you just like tuck your money under your bed and you don't give it to anybody. So, and I didn't even talk to you about this, but if you fall prey to a Ponzi scheme, do you deserve your money back? I mean, to me it's like, all right, you didn't see it. I mean, you didn't see it coming, so you kind of paid the price. I mean, 50% return on your money, wake up, all right? There's no easy money in life. You gotta work for it. That's kind of how I grew up, and I just find it fascinating that people constantly give their money to thinking that this is it, this is gonna be the one. It's not.
You've learned anything tonight? So you speak of being in a booth by yourself as opposed to like on a set with other actors. So how was your approach different for this project? How was your preparation? How did you become Charles Ponzi? Because I believed it.
Oh, thank you. Well, it was difficult for me. It was one of the hardest things I had to do because you have to stand still. And even just sitting here, I feel like I gotta get up. You're allowed to. So I'm always like leaning in. But in this recording booth, there's a microphone there, and you gotta stand still and like project what you're trying to convey through the script. And if you move to the right, to the left, you're off. They're not getting your voice. So it was difficult for me to stand still. Also, I'm big on facial expressions and showing my emotions through either body movement or face. Here I'm doing those things, and hopefully on the other side while you're listening you feel it. But yeah, I mean it was I'm not gonna lie, this was like this was a tough thing to accomplish for me. And Katie, the director, was fantastic and really kind of guiding me through, telling me to do it different ways. Will got a little impatient. He was like, okay, come on, let's go, pick it up. But we had a good time. I mean, it was a good time. It was done over several months. We didn't like knock this out in a 2-week time frame because I was touring and I was bouncing around the country, so I had to come in when I had time. But yeah, very, very difficult to do. I'd rather do the visual portion of this, which we will do, by the way. This thing's going to be a hit. I would rather do it was funny, I'm thinking backstage, would I play it different if it was visual and you could see me, which I definitely think I would, but yeah. And thanks for being here, guys, by the way. I know this is thanks for coming.
Well, I think it's time now to hear a clip from the show, which I think will allow you guys to understand how they feature the dramatic reenactment. So this first clip is from the second episode, and it's a bit of a flashback to Ponzi's life after he first arrived in the United States as a young man from Italy and the struggles that he faced. About where Ponzi is in his story and why you guys chose to focus on his backstory at this time.
Yeah, well, when Charles Ponzi first arrived, I mean, at that time in the early 1900s, Italians weren't considered white in the US. They were considered other. They were looked upon with a lot of suspicion. And so I think we're trying to show all of the hurdles that he faced racially and also in terms of language, in terms of finding a job. He felt defeated. He felt resentful that he saw other people succeeding, and he felt like, I've been rejected from so many things, I'm gonna push my way through. And you get a sense of sympathy for the guy. He was like many other immigrants, just trying to make it through.
Yeah, and listening to that, just a side note, this was one of the most difficult things I had to do. Again, you're finding all this out firsthand. They brought in like an Italian interpreter, like to coach me on how to like talk like an immigrant.
Dialect coach.
Like a dialect coach. What did I say, interpreter?
Okay, We had an interpreter also, just to try to figure out what he was saying. That was so good.
But yeah, I mean, those were things that were pining on my head. Am I doing the accent like I just got off the boat? So those were, I would go home at night going, oh, I tell my wife, I don't think I did the accent right. There was a lot of self-doubt. But yeah, it was interesting because I have a father who came to the United States when he was 15 years old. And he had told me stories about, them trying to settle here in America. They ended up in Mississippi. From Mississippi, they went to Chicago, thank God. No, they told me it was not good. But yeah, so I channeled some of those moments that he used to say about how hard it was to kind of get their feet on the ground here in America. My father opened up a hair salon shortly after coming back from the Army. So yeah, I mean, I could sympathize with the character in that point because, don't know the language, you come into a country. I mean, it's really, when you look at it, I look at my own father and just coming here when he was 15, leaving his friends, leaving his family, all he knew in Sicily, and then coming here 3 years later, getting drafted to the Army, and then serving 2 years and then starting a business. I could see, the pressure that Charles Ponzi had to succeed, especially from his mother. His mother basically sent him and said, go make something out of yourself in America, and I don't think he wanted to disappoint her. Yeah.
Yeah, and I always love in storytelling just finding out how people got to where they are, why they made the choices they made. And a lot of the notorious gangsters in our history felt like the underdogs. They felt disregarded. They felt, disrespected, ripped off, not taken seriously. So, like you said, there's much that you sympathize for with Ponzi and how hard he tried to make it in America and just how difficult it was, which was, not to condone what he did, but really understand, his objective and why he did what he did. I'm wondering, Sebastian, in all of this, when you play a character, you have to empathize with them. You're speaking about your father and that type of connection. Is that what really helped you kind of relate to him and get into that character?
I don't know, I just grew up around, all my cousins and everybody came, first generation, Americans. So I kind of grew up with an immigrant upbringing and stories of how it was in the old country opposed to how it is here. And so yeah, I channeled a lot of those, memories and stories. But listen, to be honest with you, I'm not Dustin Hoffman turning into Rain Man. This is I'm not saying I became the guy. But it's a version of I guess myself. And every role, I think you bring your personality or whatnot to the role. I just don't see myself transforming into characters when I play them as actors. It's just, even when I was doing a movie about my father, when De Niro, I had to cry in a scene with De Niro. And I was, in 2 scenes we did, I wasn't crying, right? And I told him, I go, bro, I need your help here. He goes, well, I didn't want to get involved in your process. I go, there's no process. I'm just hoping I cry in the same bit. So I'm not going to sit up there and lie to you where before I go into the booth, I'm like, okay, all right.
Well, you could have fooled me. I want every ounce of it.
I will say one thing about Ponzi. He is like a master salesman. He can sell anything to anyone, clearly, all right? Or he wouldn't have been as successful as he was. Yeah, maybe what he was doing wasn't a good thing, but he was really good at it. And so, even over this 15 years where he was struggling, he started to kind of learn what he was good at. And he was able to talk to people and win people over. And then he started to learn English and it was over. Because he could just he could get you to say yes. And when he found out that he was good at it, that's when he started to really take off. Because he's like, actually, I'm convinced the idea doesn't matter. I'm going to make someone think my idea is a winner. And that's when he started to like really go. And I think with Sebastian, he's a salesman. I mean, if you've ever seen him, he can turn on that part of him, and I think that's what really allowed him to sink into the character the way that he did. It's just like you believe it. You just believe it because he's selling you the thing.
There's one point, there's one scene I think that really depicts this, is woman comes back and she wants her money back. And the way Ponzi deals with it is so slick. He's like, yeah, no problem, give your money back. And gives the money back. And she almost feels now like, oh my God, this guy is legitimate. And he's like, no, keep the money. But he uses that particular moment to bilk other people that were around him during that scene to get their money. So yeah, he's very, like you said, you have to be good. It's a very specific skill set to entice people to give money, and he definitely had it.
Yeah. All right, well that brings us to our next clip, which is another montage, but this time it shows Ponzi's rise to fame. Pick this clip because you could feel the urgency in which things were building, how quickly things were going. And we talked about kind of the state of delusion that he would have to live in, right? Kind of believing his own bullshit in a way. But do you really think he didn't realize the trouble he was in? Do you think that he really thought he could catch up to it at some point?
I think he probably knew he was in trouble at some point, but I think he just thought he wasn't there yet. It's the fake it till you make it. Like, I just haven't made a profit yet. And that is something you see even today in Silicon Valley and many different areas. People believe in someone who has vision. They're investing in the person. They're not necessarily investing in something that they've done their due diligence on. And so I think that, he got in, he probably at some point, felt the heat, but as we saw from his love letters years later, he was still pitching new scams, saying that he was gonna do some kind of import-export scheme with trucks, trying to sell swampland in Florida. This is after he served prison time, didn't learn his lesson. So he still thought he had a great idea and it just hadn't panned out yet.
One of our guys, one of our experts in this show, his name is Eugene Soltis, and he's here tonight. Where is he? There he is, front and center, baby. Eugene Soltis is a professor at Harvard Business School, if you've ever heard of it. He is also one of the foremost experts on Ponzi schemes and Ponzi schemers, and has spent more time interviewing Bernie Madoff than anyone. So I guess I'd like to ask you, and we gave him a mic just in case we wanted to ask him something. I want to ask you, Eugene, when you're talking to someone like Bernie Madoff, same question. Like, do you think that they think what they're doing is legit and what they're doing is ultimately going to pan out or going to work? And thank you for being here, Eugene Soltis.
Thank you. And this is awesome that you've made a nuanced, complex financial story accessible in depth. I mean, it's really an awesome achievement. That question that I wanted to ask Charles Ponzi is the one I did have the chance to ask Madoff. I spoke with him every Wednesday night for 4 years, consistently, and asked him that question a lot, and he couldn't answer it. He was that optimist that we're talking about. He always thought he'd come up with something new that would get him out of it. The one time he did actually, Madoff's case, said, the thing I hope for, and it was actually pretty dark, is he actually reflected back on 9/11 when banks lost their vaults in the World Trade Center. And he said, maybe there will be a disaster and it'll wipe my records away. And in doing so, I could get a clean slate.
Wow.
That was his best plan B. Otherwise, it would just fall into his kids, which he didn't think would happen. So it just shows that delusional optimism that people in this situation have.
Thanks, Eugene.
And you also spoke of how quick he was on his feet, how quickly he would pivot in moments from one room to the next, like getting news that he was being audited and walking out into another and still pitching people. I mean, it takes a very specific type of person, and you guys all together really were able to help the listener really understand that and understand him in a beautiful way. Yeah. I also want to, again, acknowledge the format that they have here, because, like I said, you're given the history and the education from all these fantastic journalists, and then the dramatic reenactions, so you really get to absorb and experience the story from every single angle. You're riveted the entire time, truly. So I want to take us on to the next clip. So in this scene, we have Ponzi and someone from his past who shows up unexpectedly at his office one day.
Yeah, I'll give a little more context to this
Okay,
one.
good.
Just because, this is hard for you guys. You're not actually watching or listening to a full episode. So Ponzi spent time in a lot of different places. And one of the places he spent time in was Montreal. So he actually did leave the United States for a little while. And in Montreal, he was working actually at a bank. And he got caught up in the closing of this bank, and somehow, and you'll have to listen to all the podcast for the full detail, but somehow he got in trouble for cashing a forged check. And this happened years before he came to Boston and all this happened. And so he knew that he had something in his life that he never wanted anyone to know about. So he has this secret because, of course, if anyone knew that he had been in prison, especially for something related to financial fraud, he would not be legitimate and people would not give him their money. So this person who shows up one day is a real thorn in Charles Ponzi's side for the series, because he has the one secret that Charles does not want anyone to get out. So this is him showing up to his office unannounced.
Like we're in the room, right? I mean, that guy, I never met that actor. And the door, the papers rustling. I was like amazed when I heard this. I was like, man, it didn't, when I was doing it, I didn't envision that to be the end product. So, yeah, hats off to you. This is really special to hear.
Well, to that, I think, listen, the goal is for people who, maybe exclusively listen to nonfiction podcasts, for you to have something that is absolutely that, and that is the heartbeat of this show. But to also be able to have certain things feel like they're coming to life in front of you around this reporting. And I think that gave us an advantage in a lot of ways to really make moments stand out and come to life. So.
Yeah, and as somebody that absorbs a lot of entertainment, I'm sure like many of you, I watch TV with my phone in my hand a lot of the time, and this kind of takes you back to like an old way of storytelling, like when people used to gather around the radio and listen, and you're fully invested, you're riveted, and this, like you're saying, like hearing the noises in the room, it stops you in your tracks. It makes you use your imagination, and I think it's going to be a new way of storytelling that people are going to be really interested in. I know I was. But explain to us what was going on in that clip. There was some blackmailing going on, essentially, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a moment, one of those turning points where Ponzi could have come clean. He could realize, look, my past is going to catch up to me. This guy is going to spill the beans and let everybody know that I was in prison before. And I think that's one of the things that we explore is there's all these turning points where I think all of us in life have moments where we could have made a bad decision or not, and Ponzi just keeps making the bad decision, and that's how he gets to where he is. So, yeah, I mean, this was the big secret, this was the big thing that he didn't want his wife to know. He didn't want anybody to know about his past, and it comes to haunt him.
Especially and specifically this photo. This photo and its existence becomes the smoking gun around his past. And this is a mugshot that he took in Montreal that eventually, once the Boston Post really sinks their hooks in on this story, and they are determined to take him down, once they get this photo in their hands, it's the beginning of the end for him. So he knows it exists, maybe, but once he finds out that someone else knows it exists, it's problematic.
Again, Rose doesn't know the guy was in prison. It just goes to show you we're 100 years, and the internet, right away you can find out what somebody's all about. This guy's walking around with a prison record, and nobody knows, which I also found fascinating listening to the podcast.
And back in those days, you could just change your name and move to a different city and be a whole new person, and that can't happen anymore.
I was gonna say one more thing. Yes, he has this as a secret that no one knows, but one thing that really drew us to this story is this character, Charles, who is just so dynamic. And I think one thing that we really looked at was, is he all good or all bad? And I don't think he's either. I think that we found this character so fascinating because he is so dynamic, and you actually are cheering for him and rooting for him in some ways, and you're watching his real, behind the showman life, behind the curtain. And one of the secrets that we also find out about is that way before this Ponzi scheme, he had done something remarkable in Alabama, actually. I feel like I'm spoiler alerting, or I should be spoiler alerting, but yeah. Anyways, this is an interesting moment in this, is that we find out something that he did in Alabama that is incredible because it's such a charitable thing that no regular person would ever do. And he really, I won't spoil all of it, he gave something that he had, maybe the only thing that he had, to someone else in a very selfless act. And it was documented in papers, and so, he never tells anyone about this selfless act that he did, that again, it just goes above and beyond normal. And I think once we hear about that in the podcast, I think it makes you feel something different for him. It makes you feel a different way about this person that, you're seeing rip people off. And those are the interesting characters. Those are the people we want to see, rather than, there's all these podcasts out there that are just about scammers, or, documentaries that are just about scammers.
Yeah.
This is about more than a scammer. It's about a real person who had real feelings and a real, love life, and a real road that we try to follow.
The greatest characters in history, fictional or not, I got to live a life with one of them, Tony Soprano, right? He was not a good guy. But we all loved him, and we all rooted for him because we saw him in his entirety as a human being. And one of the beautiful parts about Charles Ponzi, and one of the reasons why you fall in love with him, is his love with Rose and their love for each other, which you guys spend a lot of time on because of the love letters that you've been able to discover between the two of them that they sent each other while he was in jail. So could you guys tell us more about their love?
Can we see the love letters? I know we have a photo of the love letters too. It just helps you get in the mood.
Yeah, so one of the cool things that we were able to do, I flew to Boston from where I live in Mexico City and went out to sit with some of Rose's descendants. So she didn't have kids, but these were people that were her nephews and their kids. And they kept copies of a big stack of letters, both handwritten and written on a typewriter. She wanted these destroyed upon her death, but somebody decided to keep them. And the kind of representative of her family told me, you know, this is part of history, and we're not going to destroy these, and we don't have any problem with you sharing them because they don't paint her in a bad light, and now it's part of the historical record. And what we have are all the letters that he sent to her. We don't have the letters that she sent to him because those would be in his possession, and we believe from everything we've read that he destroyed all of his records. But we can tell that she was writing back to him because of how he responded. And you know, he would say things like, "Hey kid, you know, it's been too long since I got a letter from you, or your last letter was this or that." And they really, as much as their relationship changed, and they actually ended up getting a divorce at one point when he was in exile, they kept writing to each other, and they kept having this epistolary affair where they were, there's even one letter where he says, like, "I can't believe that photo you sent me, you know, like this nude photo." He referenced it, and there were all these references to how he still thinks about her, and he even was trying to get her to come down. He wound up in Brazil at one point toward the end of his life, and he was trying to get her to come down there. And she was even suggesting that she come down there. So we just know that there was that real thread in his life. She had desperately wanted kids, and he wanted them too, but you know, when do you find time to have kids when you're running a Ponzi scheme? And so it's actually really sad that they never got to do that, and you know, they didn't have the happily ever after that they had envisioned because of his self-delusion and of his drive to succeed in a dark way.
If your mother looked like that, would you steal? I mean, that's who was telling them to go make it in the Americas. I mean, that's stone cold.
Yeah, poor Rose really was in a relationship with both Charles and his mother because she was a big presence.
Well, and you know, like you said, she didn't know about what he was doing for so long, but even when she knew what was going on, she stood by him. She stood by him through the 10 years that he was in prison prior to him being exiled. So there was some real love there. But that brings us to our next clip. This clip is from episode 5, and it's between Ponzi and Rose on the morning of the first front page story.
Lana, you want to take that? You know, once you find out what this guy did in Alabama, it's so extraordinary. I mean, not even like a normal person would do this. You're going to completely have a different look at Ponzi. Because you sit up here and you go, how can you feel sorry for a guy that ripped off $250 million from people? But once you hear about this story, that what he did, it's going to change your perspective of the guy. So that's when I read that, I was like, gee.
You talk about in episode 5 that being the peak of Ponzi. What does that mean?
Yeah, so he had taken in so much money that it was like cash back then. It was just, sloshing around his office, and people were still giving him money. And then, during this time though, people had suspicions of him, and the authorities were after him, the Postmaster General, the Banking Commission. He was mad. Other bankers were noticing how much money people were taking out of their accounts to give over to Ponzi. And so there was this growing suspicion around him that eventually led to enough attention that he got found out, which we get into from a kind of unlikely source.
Yeah, and I thought was very interesting was like, which publication was it? Was it the Post that was?
The Boston Post.
Boston Post was sort of running negative stories about him, and he would kind of turn and double down, and then was somehow able to get the other papers to rally behind him and have all these journalists kind of defend him and celebrate him, and that was really impressive that he was able to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, like any, I've covered many politicians in my career. The really good ones, they know how to use a scandal. They love attention, and so that is just another opportunity for them to get in front of the cameras and do their spin. And there was even some negative headlines that came out that brought in more money for him because it just brought more publicity to him. But yeah, it ended up being another newspaper man who had retired from that and had a post-journalism pivot to public relations, a very common thing to do, and became his PR guy, who ended up, his name was William McMasters, who ended up looking around the office and kind of asking Ponzi questions and not getting very good answers, and that was the guy that was where things started to turn, where you really had somebody from the inside who had the power to bring him down.
And he was the ultimate whistleblower, right?
He was. It was even just a few days into working with Ponzi that William McMasters, this former reporter turned PR guy, did enough digging to find that Ponzi actually didn't have the money that he claimed he had. And McMasters went to the Boston Post and said, I want to write a story. I'm willing to put my name on it. And that is very rare. Most Ponzi schemes, there's just nobody. We talked about how the employees don't know, the wife doesn't know. It's rare to have somebody on the inside who's willing to stake their entire reputation on something like this, because Ponzi could have gone after McMasters and taken him down. So this headline, Hopelessly Insolvent, was really the beginning of the end for Ponzi.
And McMasters wrote his own memoir, correct? Did you use a lot for your research in this?
Yeah, he wrote a memoir which people didn't know about until about a decade ago. His granddaughter donated many of his effects to a library that somebody on our team was able to go and sit and look at. You can't check it out. You can't, it's not like a bound book you can walk out of the library with, and went and read it, and we have McMaster's account. So that was really useful to be able to read Ponzi's version of events and weigh that against McMaster's account and really put together that story.
All right, Will, you want to introduce this last clip?
Yeah, absolutely. At that time, not much. I mean, of course, you have photographs and things like that, as we've seen, but not much video existed. And the video that does exist was very special at the time to have anyone shoot video for the newspaper or whatever. Ponzi was so famous at this time that they had a whole camera crew come out and shoot him and Rose and his mother at their house one day. And there is some of that here that we can watch him in real action. This is a silent film, obviously. Rose?
Never smiles.
I actually went to that house in Lexington, Massachusetts, and knocked on the door and got to go inside. And the current homeowner has a binder full of Ponzi memorabilia because when you buy that house, as several people have done after Ponzi, the real estate agents are open about the fact that this was Charles Ponzi's house, and look at the history, and there's photos in that binder of the scenes you just saw of like, here's this financial fraudster hanging out on your porch. So it's, the house has been renovated since, but it was pretty wild to go inside.
And by the way, this house costs like $4 million today, or 5, and the guy who bought it is a finance guy. So all full circle.
Surprising. So even with 8 episodes full of so much, I'm sure there was a lot that you couldn't fit in. Are there any things that you wish you could have explored more that maybe you could share with us tonight about Charles and the story?
Oh yeah, real quick, I mean, this is like, he faked his death at one point, like, we didn't even talk about that. This is a guy, he put together this disguise at one point when he was running. He did some crazy shit. What else
Oh yeah. Be a mini-series.
Oh yeah, he was trying to sell swampland, which was like a huge scheme type thing back then because, you couldn't actually build on it. He was, what else?
Well, his cousin was a pilot for Mussolini, so he's
the most Italian thing you could ever
as an aside, we didn't have time to really go into it, but he, kept close ties with his Italian family, and his cousin, who had been a pilot for Mussolini, ended up fleeing Italy post-Mussolini, as many Mussolini-aligned Italians did, to South America, and started an airline. And that is where Ponzi got a job, working out of Rio de Janeiro. And so I actually spoke to Ponzi's cousin's great-grandson, who lives in Chile, and knew that he was related to Ponzi, talked to me a bit about it, but didn't know much more than we knew what is available on the internet and stuff like that. And so, Ponzi really has this very far-flung story connected to some really interesting characters in history, and there's lots of other threads you could go down of how far this reaches. But he didn't have kids, and he doesn't have siblings, so it was hard to.
But he has a legacy.
But he has a legacy, and so yeah, we those are some of the threads we could explore.
So Maya, as a financial reporter, what are some takeaways that you hope people leave this tonight and after listening to the podcast, considering how common Ponzi schemes are?
There's no such thing as guaranteed returns, as we talked about, even if it's a guaranteed, 12% return, something that sounds reasonable. No such thing as guaranteed returns. If your financial advisor asks you to invest in his fund, but asks you to make out the check to his name, that is a red flag. All investments should be registered. You can go to FINRA, F-I-N-R-A. You can see the Securities and Exchange Commission actually regulates investments like that. Don't invest with friends and family. If it's sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do, but interestingly, Ponzi schemes can't really be stopped. People keep doing this, people keep believing it. I even talked to some people just in my personal life, and they mentioned to me, oh yeah, I would probably invest with a friend over, some person that I don't know, even if they're a registered, investment advisor. So, this is just one of those interesting things that keeps coming up.
Yeah, we interviewed a woman in this, a real woman who was caught up in a Ponzi scheme, a real one, from a few years ago. she says in the podcast, you know, that she lost all of the inheritance she was planning to give to her kid, and she's still not told her about it because she feels so much shame around it. And just to hear from someone who so recently has had her life screwed up by something like this, I mean, it's like a terrible thing that, again, is not slowing down anytime soon.
Here's what bothers me. I don't know if anybody feels the same way. I think the modern day Ponzi scheme is baked into this GoFundMe, right? I can understand, you know, hard times, medical problem, whatever, but a lot of these people are using the GoFundMe as a way to fund their lavish lifestyle. So they'll go on going, whatever, I need funeral costs for my grandfather. Maybe the grandfather didn't die, and they're taking people's money and using it to go out to dinner, buy cars. So every time I see a GoFundMe, I get a rash. I mean, it could be a good cause, but there's...
At least they're not promising you any returns. They're just asking for a
And who's doing
donation.
this? Who's donating to these things? Who's doing this?
I am.
So, are you doing GoFundMe? Well, you're getting robbed.
I just want to quickly say thank you to the team from Outlaw Media who's here, who put in this thing. Thank you to Apple TV Plus, thank you to Tribeca for wanting to do such a cool event for podcasts, which are, you know, not typically part of this type of festival. So.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to close it out by asking you, Sebastian, you've spent so much time with Charles as Charles. If he was sitting in this audience in that front row today, what would you like to say to him?
I guess the one question I would like to ask Charles would be, did you plan on stealing from everybody? I guess, because I know the good side of Charles, so I would like to know if he went into this with the intention of ripping everybody off, which I don't think he did. I just think he got in over his head. Maybe I'm naive in thinking that way, but I would just like to know if he started this whole thing by going, I'm going to steal every dime I can get.
I think after finishing listening to this, a lot of other people would have that same question because of how brilliantly you played him, and you guys, you know, set the world and helped us understand him and
He
everything.
would be absolutely tickled
Oh, he'd
that this
love
is
it.
happening. This is like his fantasy.
I don't know if you noticed on that picture that the number was 666, by the way, on the bottom right corner. All right, well, I just want to thank everyone here tonight on the stage and everyone here in this audience. Thank you for coming. The full season of Peachy Money, Charles Ponzi Story will be available on Apple Podcasts on Monday to Apple TV Plus subscribers. And for everyone else, the first 2 episodes will be out then, with the rest following weekly. Have a wonderful night. Thank you so much.